Emily Dickinson's poetry is personal and represents her own ideas about spirituality and her ideas about the human condition. The ideas and themes she explores are not only relevant to the time that she lived in, but relate to the human condition in general, and therefore have universal appeal. The poem I Had Been Hungry is written in a hymn or ballad verse. The tension between a desire to belong, but not to sacrifice her individual status, is evident here. The dominant use of I in the opening line is clear. The use of first person continues throughout the poem. 5 lines begin with I, and it is used 4 more times within lines. This clearly emphasises a first person perspective on belonging by this speaker. The use of past tense throughout this poem demonstrates the reflective nature of the speaker when looking back at these experiences. The speaker acknowledges her desire to belong in the opening line, I had been hungry all the years. Hunger acting as a conceptual metaphor for a desire to belong at the table with others, and the universal all implying the duration and extent of her yearning. Desire is a hunger. It could be hunger or a desire for anything. Hungry can represent a desire for a quest for meaning, understanding, spiritual fulfillment, friendship or love. Satisfaction is the eating or the plenty. The use of noon can suggest the prime of one's life. The expectations of life and the awareness that now her time has come. The highly emotive use of trembling, however, evokes an anxiety or conflict as she touches the wine that has made her curious. The inversion of the syntax near ends the line. Signalling is drawn to the speaker by herself. I drew the table near. The table is a symbol of social interaction. The speaker will belong, but only on her terms. She is tentative, and she's still not touching the wine or drinking the wine. There are clear allusions to the Eucharist here, wine and later bread as a sacramental union. Feasting biblically is associated with the Christian community, even communion with the divine. For the speaker, belonging is fraught, difficult, potentially alienating, and something she approaches with a great trepidation. This quatrain explores the persona looking in longingly at experiences of others. Are they an outsider looking in? We need to consider, what does the window represent? It can symbolise a barrier, or that the persona is an observer rather than a participant. Dickinson intensifies the juxtaposition of a complicated desire for belonging with turning hungry home, with a realisation that belonging is not possible. I could not hope mine. Mine is noticeably juxtaposed with home in Dickinson's characteristic ABCB rhyme scheme to enforce and emphasise her sense of dislocation at this stage. It's important to consider at this stage the symbolism of these words. Table, typically a place where a community comes to dine together, and windows. What does a window represent? The idea of the barrier to belonging, a symbol for being able to look in but not truly belong. It's important also to consider what we think about when we hear the word wealth. What does that represent in our society, and what did it represent in Dickinson's time? Was it wealth in terms of economical aspects, or in terms of the richness of a person's, an individual's life? The use of ample here, an adjective rejecting the idea of conventional belonging through the church, the ample bread. The speaker is unaccustomed to the concept of social engagement. She did not know the ample bread. The speaker lives at one with nature, and nature is unable to provide the benefits of human companionship. The implication of solitude and the effects of the individual are clearly explored here. It's important to consider the contrast between ample bread and the crumb that the speaker is accustomed to, that the speaker is used to sharing with the birds. The symbolism of the birds represent the idea that the birds are on the margins that never fully belong. Birds are a common motif to express self in Dickinson's poetry, to represent herself. Birds can also represent the freedom and independence of these creatures and their freedom in the natural world. By Dickinson, by the speaker referring to the idea that the birds and I had often shared, represents this idea that the speaker is used to the crumb rather than the ample bread shared with those outside of society. The personification of nature's dining room highlights how the speaker is accustomed to a natural life and how there is a simplicity found in nature that is unlike the complexity of religion. This stanza conveys the individual nature of her challenging relationship with belonging. Her feelings of alienation are explored in The Plenty Hurt Me. Its individuality in the repetition of the personal pronoun me, mine, and myself. This is how she feels. As an oxymoron, this contrasts plenty, being dearly sought, with the painful and indigestible truth. The speaker is aware that engaging with society can be painful and restrictive. There is a possibility of a loss of freedom and individuality. The words here, ill and odd, describe the speaker's concerns about conformity and how the initial excitement has given way to a disappointing realisation. The simile, as berry of a mountain bush transplanted to the road, suggests the individual's alienation and the sharp contrast between the mountains and the road. We need to think about, as a responder, what do each of these places represent? What are the connotations of mountains, the nature, wilderness, and what are connotations of the road, urbanisation, commerce, economy? We need to consider that this berry has little chance of survival. The important juxtaposition between mountain bush and road highlights this difference. The speaker's belonging must be achieved in a different way with those whom she shared the crumb. Those who share her values, be that in their attitude to nature or their desire for certain solitude. In the final stanza, the conceptual metaphor of hungry continues. By this stage, the speaker is again looking through the windows on the wealth she could not hope for, and she makes up her mind, proclaiming, "The entering takes away." The conceptual metaphor is continued and is now highlighting a loss of appetite. She's not hungry. The speaker here is confirming the idea that she's accustomed to her ways. She feels more secure and safe being hungry. She realises the need to maintain spiritual independence and accepts her reality outside the window. The speaker realises that both worlds cannot be reconciled and there is a greater freedom outside. The hunger defines her identity, and the windows and the entering highlight the way she has considered these ideas and made her conclusions. Dickinson has built her own world in which to belong. Her identity is intact, her desire is intact, and it's valued because it is never spoilt by too much of what she cannot tolerate. There is a clear paradox explored within the poem, wanting what you can't have and the unattainable nature of satisfaction. While we as the responder may not feel as the speaker does, her words can evoke a range of emotions that we share. And in that way, Dickinson connects to us through the language of her poetry.